Rachel, you were the girl in high school that had all the boyfriends, that got great grades, that, won, this is embarrassing, but won best body and whatever it was, like your life seemed perfect. And I had no idea that you had all these family secrets and were dealing with so much.
Dear Family is a podcast hosted by Rachel Steinman, a writer, an educator, and a mental health advocate. And Rachel gets us up close and personal, so we feel a strong connection, familiarity, and comfort with her guests. So settle in and join us as we search for true healing and journey with Rachel and her most interesting guests.
Hi, dear family and friends. Get ready for another inspirational and eye-opening story. Thank you so much for listening. And if you aren't already doing so, please subscribe and share, dear family. It means the world to me and makes all the difference. And if you want to continue and contribute to the conversations, please join my private Facebook group, Dear Family Members. You get to see secret photos and videos only Dear Family members are privy to, and you'll even have the opportunity to ask me and my guests questions directly. The link is in the show notes. I can't wait to see you there.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Dear Family. I have a really bad cold this morning, which is why my voice is so low. Just kidding. This isn't Rachel, this is Ben. And we have decided to flip the tables on you all, and I'm going to be asking the questions, and she's going to be answering the questions. And her story is fantastic and is really the genesis for why we're even doing this, or she's doing this, and I get to be a part of it. So sit back and relax and enjoy another episode of Dear Family. Rachel was a psychology major, and she received her master's in education and multiple teaching credentials from UCLA. And she's also taught every elementary school grade, K through 6th, which is wow. And she's been the school librarian too. So there you go. Rachel is now embarking on a new career as a writer and an essayist and a memoirist. And she's already, I don't know how many years you've been doing this, Rach, but you've written a ton. I tell you, it's just constant. So really impressive stuff. And she has basically put herself at the very center of the mental health conversation. And it's really admirable what she's doing. There's a reason to all of that, and we're going to get to it, but it's become a very powerful and a very important part of her, I would say, second career. Let me get to just a little bit more of who Rachel is. She married my friend Todd, and he's great. It's very hard for me to say handsome, so I'm not going to say handsome, but yeah, he's handsome. He's actually very hilarious, and they're best friends, and they have two extremely accomplished, wonderful, healthy, happy teenage daughters. They've rescued a great dog. They live a really enviable life, I would say. The interesting thing about people who live, quote, enviable lives, unquote, is that if you look a little bit deeper, and this applies to Rachel, I believe, you'll see that there's more than meets the eye. This has been a journey for Rachel that has opened up a lot of doors, and we're going to get into everything. But her family, when I say her family, I'm talking about her parents and siblings and grandparents all around her, has bipolar disorder, depression, drug addiction, ADHD, neurosis, narcissism, and even suicide. It's really tragic if you think about it in that context. That's a lot. And that really is all around her. She's the half-sister and stepdaughter of parents on their third marriages and a third divorce. And she is a mom, and she's doing her best to raise her daughters growing up in this increasingly anxiety-filled world where there's, social media, college applications and tuitions, and, there's just constant stress and pressure. And I would agree that anybody who knows you, Rachel, would say that you're one of the happiest, loveliest people to be around. You love to laugh, and I love to make you laugh. It's one of my favorite pastimes. And I think that's a good start for our interview. So let's sort of just launch in. So I'm going to start with a question that I think a lot of your friends might be curious about, and your family. What was the sort of inciting incident, for lack of a better phrase, the thing that got you motivated to write to the degree that you are now?
Well, first of all, let me start by saying thank you so much for interviewing me. This is really strange to be on the other side of the microphone.
This is my pleasure.
So that's a really good question. And it all began 24 years after my grandpa jumped from his high rise. And I was 40 years old. You were 40
years old when it happened?
I was 40 years old, 24 years after he jumped.
Gotcha.
So I was 16 years old when my grandfather died by suicide.
I can't even imagine what that must have been like.
Yeah, so for 24 years, I just wondered, how could a man do something like that? He seemingly had everything. He had family that loved him. He had business success. He had his physical health. He was still golfing and playing tennis. He was traveling the world. So I never understood how he could do something like that. So cut to 24 years later, I'm 40 years old. I'm kind of at a point where I'm questioning my own self, my own sanity. My mom and I are not doing great. Our relationship is a bit rocky, and that's because she was not diagnosed as bipolar yet, although hindsight is 20/20. She was likely bipolar since she was 14. And I was finally allowed back into the high rise, and I did not know what I would discover. I was hoping to just see maybe there was an estate that might help my mom. Or
how are you allowed? Why is it that you were allowed into the high rise?
Good question. So my grandfather's third wife, her name was Susie Greer, passed away, and her executor of the estate said that I could go and look through to take, personal photos and take memorabilia, things that might be of value to our family, personal value. And I knew my grandfather had started a memoir, but I didn't think it existed because although I was in touch with his third wife, Susie Greer, I asked her, could I read it? And she shook her head and led me to believe it no longer existed. So I found it. And I just was completely blown away because it was just eye-opening and showed me so many different sides of my family that I'd always been wondering about, and basically uncovered a lot of dark family secrets, which we all have. Every family has secrets. And
I don't. I'm
you
perfect.
Don't?
Everything's perfect.
And everything's out in the open,
yeah.
Right? And it led me on this journey to kind of uncover all the missing pieces, because although there was a lot to go on, there was also a lot hidden. There were also pages missing. And
how long did you sit in that apartment that first day?
I think I sat there for like 3 hours on my grandfather's office floor, just going page through page through page, just not even realizing that the time was going. I think, the sun had set and I had young kids at home and I was late to come get them. I couldn't move. It took me a few months to kind of just marinate in what I had read. And I knew there was a story there. And I decided I'm going to become my grandfather's ghostwriter, and I'm going to fill in those missing gaps. And I started asking my mom questions. I asked my uncle some questions before he passed away.
This is your mother's father,
This is my mother, yes. Okay. This is my mother's father. So I started asking my mom questions. The sad part about the memoir that my grandfather had written, and actually there were two pieces of it. He wrote a business manual of his 50 years of business success as a real estate mogul, which was phenomenal, but I wasn't interested in that. I kept looking for my name and my mom's name and my grandmother's name. That is my grandfather's first wife. Her name was Doris. And I look very much like her. She was this artist with big brown eyes and same body type, everything. And my mom looks like her. And I would say even Molly looks like her. We all have those kind of same big brown eyes. And my grandfather described her as impish, but there was not a ton about her. And that's...
Do you remember her?
Well, no, I never met her. So that was part of the story. My mom, sadly, was just 14 years old when she discovered her own mother, Doris, had died by suicide. She had swallowed a bottle of Seconal, which are sleeping pills, with a bottle of alcohol. And my mom found her on the same day my mom got her period for the first time and walked in to go tell her mom. And Doris used to call her period the curse.
So she was literally walking in. She was literally walking in. This thing is happening.
Correct. Like,
I need your help.
What a cycle of life moment. If you're following, that means my mom's mother and father both died by suicide. More than that, my grandfather, his brother, and his father also died by suicide. So clearly, this is 4 family suicides. This means my grandfather's wife, his brother, and his father all took their lives, and eventually he would too. But the irony was that his memoir was called The Bounce Back Man or The Survivor. He hadn't picked a title yet. The irony, because he ended up jumping to his death from the 14th floor on Wilshire in Beverly Glen. And every time I would go into that high rise, it was like the most iconic Los Angeles, beautiful view of the Hollywood Hills, of Bel Air, of Beverly Hills. You could see the Hollywood sign and the Griffith Park Observatory.
Wow, what a thing to walk into. And more to the point here, what a thing to realize that within this trove of information comes an idea. And that idea was for you to write this all down and make a double memoir.
Originally, that was not my plan. My plan was to just write my grandfather's story. But as I started taking some writing classes, because I was a teacher, I was not a writer. So I started taking classes at UCLA and reading memoirs, just consuming them left and right, and reading about writing. I realized I had a story to tell myself. I could see all these parallels between my grandfather's story and my story. And I realized with families, traumas get passed down, not just mental illness, but traumas and the shame and generational ideas gets passed down the family line. Yes, mental illness can get passed down. Yes, money can get passed down. Yes, musical abilities and big brown eyes. But in order for me to cut the line so that I would not pass it on to my girls, I wanted to start writing about it and
deal with it.
Yeah.
Good on you for recognizing that if you don't go after this in some way to try to heal some of those open wounds, you're only going to be passing it on in one form or another. So bravo to you.
And I also just want to add, I think that our kids are lucky in that mental health, yes, we still have to get rid of the stigma, but people are talking about it. Whereas like my grandma Doris, when she was struggling with her bipolar and her son going off to college and whatever issues, maybe midlife issues, no one discussed it. It was so shameful and stigmatized. You didn't even discuss it with your husband.
Sure.
So now,
it's a brave new world.
I mean, I don't know if you know this, but my girls go to different schools. On the back of their new ID cards this year is the suicide hotline. I wonder a little bit, like, have we gone a little bit too far? But the good news is there's discussions happening. Yeah.
Okay, now I want to sort of take a step back. I'm sure we'll keep going forward on this topic and more, but I want to talk about your early life. You said that you're sure to some degree you could look at your life and see that there was a certain degree, now I'm paraphrasing here, of mental illness and that disease sort of manifesting in various ways. you, like me, are a product of divorce. And how old were you when your parents divorced? What was the impact on you and your brother? And how has your relationship with your parents affected, the last however many years it's been since they did divorce? I mean, that's a big question. But basically, I want to hear a little bit about the effect that divorce and the subsequent events had on your life.
So I grew up in Encino in a beautiful home on a tree-lined cul-de-sac with my best friend next door, riding bikes and just having this kind of idyllic life. And I thought everything was great until my parents got divorced around when I was about 10 years old.
Did you have any inkling that something was happening?
I do remember hearing them fighting. And I do remember leading up to that, my mom and dad not only fighting about money, but fighting about how my dad was working all the time. And my mom was bipolar, but not diagnosed. And she was having her moments of mania.
Wow.
And she just, the idea of being stuck home with 2 kids when she wanted to get out during the 70s and 80s and disco dance. And, my mom and dad, they were the drug of choice among a lot of adults back then was cocaine, which did not help my mom's mania. And I remember kind of having that first inkling of like going to Balboa Park when we used to all go roller skating and seeing my mom being wild. And,
do you think she was just like medicating a little bit? Like maybe
she
it
was
made her feel better?
Medicating. She was totally self-medicating. And, she also had never dealt with her mother's suicide. And she had a lot of trauma and tragedy that never was really worked out. She just wanted to mask it. And then once my parent and my mom was having affairs, and once my parents...
Did you know?
No, I did not. But, I was young, and my mom let my dad keep the big, nice house in Encino and moved my brother and I to, as I say, quote, the wrong side of the tracks, which, let's be honest, it wasn't really the wrong side of the tracks. But
explain that. What is
it's just like a condo off the freeway.
Okay.
When
so
I grew up in Encino, I didn't have the yard and the pool. And exactly. And it sounds very spoiled, but when you grow up and you see that around you,
it's not what you're used to.
And so my mom let my dad keep the house because I think out of guilt for leaving my dad and having been either caught having an affair or just, I actually don't even know those details.
Do you think you'd ever feel comfortable talking to your mom about that?
Well,
getting that information?
Yeah, she knows. I mean, look, she's going to be listening to this. Sure. And let me just start by saying, I really want my listeners to know that my mom and I have never been better, and how much I love and admire and respect my mom. And none of this could have been possible had it not been me getting to this point of writing and talking about it.
That's amazing.
So, that should give my listeners a sense of there is total hope. Even if you think that, but on the flip side, my mom was always so loving and such a warm person. And you know how you talked about how money can't buy happiness?
Sure.
My mom knew that from the beginning. She grew up.
I love your mom. I've always loved your mom.
My mom grew up in Scarsdale, which is a very wealthy suburb. And she saw both of her parents unhappy. They had all the money in the world, and that was not the source of happiness. And so she understood early on and taught me that is not the source of happiness. Yeah, so their divorce affected me because my mom ended up dating a younger man that moved in, and he was,
When was this?
I was about 10 or 11.
Oh, right away.
He had a daughter that came and come stay with us, and I had to share.
Here's your sister.
And I had to share a room with this girl, and my life just felt. I remember feeling at that age just envious of my wealthy cousins in New York and my friends who had this quote unquote picture perfect life. And my brother Adam in podcast 1 does a great job talking about how we both felt.
That is a fantastic interview. If you haven't listened, please go back and listen to that one. It's a gem.
And I will say, I think that's what kind of pushed me to not be home very much. I had boyfriends at a pretty young age, and I was always at 15. I was always at their house. I was not, and supervised or ish. It was the 80s. It was so different from how we parent now. Yeah. I mean, and I was we were taking the public bus everywhere. Oh, yeah, I remember parents had no idea where we were. Westwood. Yeah, down to the beach, wherever. Sure. But of course, my parents' divorce had a big impact on me. And yet I had this internal drive to still be a really good student. And I always knew my parents loved me. So even though my dad had a new family and a new life, and I didn't go there as much as I should have, and but hindsight is 2020. But among all of that, I will say, and I talk about this often, I did write an essay about how divorced parents don't have to suck. What my parents did right was continue to love my brother and I unconditionally, tell us the divorce was not our fault, and not talk poorly about one another. Sure. That's wonderful. That's a gift. Yes. That's a gift. And, I know that this is a long answer, but I will say, because I think it's important to know, that when I was about 14 years old, I was following in my mom's manic footsteps. And How did that I was starting to experiment with drugs and sexuality, things that a 14-year-old girl should not be doing. And my grandma Susie and my grandpa Robert, the man that jumped from his high-rise before he did this, they saw me kind of spiraling out of control and decided to step in and send me to these international camp in Switzerland. Whoa. And I left my surroundings and saw this other world. And there's something really incredible about having your eyes opened at that very formative age. Oh, yeah. And the reason why I point this out is because it really was, I think, I call her Grandma Susie. She married my grandpa. I was only one. I really do think that somebody that's not biologically related to you can be just as important in your life as a parent. She stepped in and she saved me. She showed me this other world. That's beautiful. So you mentioned that you have taken it upon yourself to sort of nip in the bud this growing mental, I would say, illness that runs rampant in your family by writing about it, addressing the situation, enlightening your kids to it. My question to you is, was there ever a point in time where you got really worried about yourself and passing this along? Did you ever look at your kids I think I need to watch them just to make sure kind of thing? Or was it hey, they're good? Don't stress. No, it's a very good question. Bipolar is highly irritable, highly. Yes, of course. If I see my kids have major mood swings, it's is that the start? Yeah. And I do worry about, there's been a lot of addictions in my family, and I worry about that being passed down. But the truth is, I think because so early on, my daughters are armed with knowing their past or their family's past, and knowing that if they need to have any resources, we are here for them, and that there's no shame, that they will never get in trouble for coming to us for anything, meaning substance issues. I'm feeling very positive for them. But yes, of course, I worry about it. But a lot less now than I probably would have had this conversation not been so open. Why a lot less now? What do you attribute that to? A lot less now just because we talk about mental health. We talk about the importance of mental health. Both my girls know that their uncle got addicted to crystal meth while he was in law school to study, and that they should not be taking drugs like Adderall or whatever to boost their score, and that, look where it can lead you. Or if you're feeling anxious, let's deal with this. Let's talk about this. There's a roadmap. You don't have to turn to substances. There are ways out. And they see it also by looking at their Grammy, who is doing brilliantly now because she is not running from her disorder or disease or whatever you want to call it. She's embracing who she is and getting help. She's embracing who she is, and she's actually owning it. She's telling people, I'm bipolar. Or actually what you're supposed to say is, I have bipolar, right? You wouldn't say like,
because
I am heart disease.
That doesn't identify yourself as that.
But my mom's taking medication. She's going to therapy. She's talking about it. The moment she feels something, she names it.
Wow.
And I think that is such a healthy model for the girls.
Sure.
So that...
And they love...
and they absolutely adore her. And, the truth is... Also, a lot of mental illnesses come out around the teenage years, or when they're, like, I would say, like by 14, things start showing up. Just having these conversations and being aware, and I know schools are now starting to talk more about it. I'm feeling very positive. Don't get me wrong, it's not over. We still have a mountain to climb. But as far as my daughters, had I not started writing, had my mom and I not really connected and been on great grounds, and I don't know if we would be where we are.
I want to go back to your grandfather and something you mentioned, and it sort of pairs with what we're talking about here, which is your grandfather didn't have the help of this being the topic of the day, nor did anyone else in your family generations ago. This was shamed illness or disease. And do you ever wonder what things would have been like for him had he had the help that he needed? Does that ever affect
all the
you?
time, all the time. So in my memoir, which I'm still working on birthing into the world, so it has not come out yet, but that is definitely something I think about a lot. And now here's the thing. My grandma Doris and my grandpa Robert both were on lithium. They both had electric shock therapy. So they were both doing the things that were thought. It's not like they weren't being addressed, but I still think the stigma and the shame around it just made it exponentially harder.
Torturous to talk about.
And, I also think that had there been mindfulness or yoga, or who knows, maybe had they taken CBD to help them sleep, or who knows, alternative medicines, acupuncture, support groups so they could see there were other people. Now, my grandfather, it's not
and then you think about how many other people we've lost because they couldn't talk about their disease.
Right,
and
like
they
Anthony
couldn't
Bourdain,
take it.
or, he probably couldn't come out publicly. But, here's the thing that I will say is that it's more than just biology, right? It's also the traumas. I mean, my grandfather lost his own father and his brother and his wife. So there's trauma added to his already mental illness, right? So it's both. It's biology and the environment.
Sure.
Yeah. Knowing that, I definitely think as far as the biology, I don't know if that could have been changed, but the environment could have definitely helped.
I look at your brother, who I've always felt a connection to, and I'm so proud of him knowing, look, he found out that he was strung out, he was in trouble, and he turned his life around and he's living the dream. And I think about your family and how many people could have done the same thing had they been given an opportunity to speak to therapists. And lithium, as we know, it was not necessarily the answer. It's sort of repeated therapy. And I applaud you for tackling an issue that, quite frankly, no matter how much it's discussed, you can't talk about it enough. And so what you're doing, I think, is really important. Like I said at the top, I think you're changing lives already. You're changing your kids' lives.
Well, can I just say something about that? So I started off by writing an essay about my grandfather and comparing him to Anthony Bourdain and saying, I wish I could have told you the next day will be better. But within that essay, I talked about my own family and my own life. And I received so many private messages and personal emails and phone calls from people that I had not spoken to in so long, thanking me, saying, Rachel, you were the girl in high school that had all the boyfriends, that got great grades, that, this is embarrassing, but won best body and whatever it was, your life seemed perfect. And I had no idea
that you had all these family secrets and were dealing with so much. And thank you so much for just sharing and coming and being brave. And that's when I realized, okay, there's a podcast about talking about our families, because every family has something. And
that is for sure.
And so that is why I'm doing this. I'm doing this to show everyone that whatever it is that you're feeling, you're not alone.
That's a beautiful statement, because what happens when we're alone is our brain sort of takes over, our mind races. And one of the sort of tenets of AA is, if you feel like you need a drink or something, call someone so that you can be helped. You're not alone is a really important piece of
which is what you're doing when you talk about so openly about your Crohn's and colitis and what you've been through, talking about subjects that are normally taboo and embarrassing, coming straight out and saying, guys, this is me, take it or leave it, the messy truth. And guess what? People love you more for it. And then there's a deeper connection.
Yeah, I thank you for that. And you must know this by now, the feeling you get when you get those DMs and you're actually changing someone's day. Let's not go so broad and say their life, but you're changing their day, their hour, their minute. You're giving them hope. There's nothing like it. And I would have been foolish, and as would you, to pass up this opportunity. I mean, you have really taken the bull by the horns, and you're just moving forward with such gusto on this.
But what if Doris had a podcast to listen to where there were
I'd love to listen to that.
But I mean, if she back in the 50s could have listened to other women struggling with the same things she was struggling with. Now, granted, again, we're talking about biology, and her husband was having affairs. I mean, it's so deep, right?
Sure.
But I question that a lot, how things would have been different.
Yeah, I think it's an unavoidable inevitability of this unearthing that you've begun and really are continuing to tear open this issue.
I mean, one thing I will say that I'm concerned about, yes, we're talking about taboo subjects and unearthing topics that weren't talked about before. What I'm concerned going forward is our kids' anxiety levels and the suicide rate going up. So all the more reason to keep talking.
For sure. And, suicide is in a lot of ways glorified. There are these shows, 13 Reasons Why. And, I could only really get through the first season of it. But that's a very disquieting piece of the puzzle here, which is, with Instagram, anybody can take a picture and say, I'm about to kill myself, and there's nothing you can do. And all these horrible stories we hear about kids whose lives are in peril and they're getting guns and doing crazy things. As much as we do live in an era where there is help available that there wasn't, say, 30, 40, 50 years ago, we have our host of problems raising kids. And I think talking about anything and everything and giving your kids like sort of that soft pillow to land on in times of trouble or crisis that they might be experiencing is kind of key. That's just fantastic that you and Todd are providing that for your girls.
Yes. I don't know if this is a repeat, but we're only as sick as our secrets. And by being brave enough to ask for help, or to share your story, you are kind of releasing it to the universe. And there's absolutely no shame or stigma in having a mental health issue.
Well, there shouldn't be.
Right.
And we're trying to create a world, really, and you're doing it, person by person, where the shame is being minimized.
Right. And you're exactly right. There shouldn't be. There still is. For example, if a politician comes out and says that they are bipolar, are you going to question whether or not they are well suited to represent you? What I've learned, and we talked about this, is that you are not your disease. You are not, actually some of the most brilliant minds, for example, Elon Musk or incredible artists and musicians, have had to deal with mental health issues, and we wouldn't want them to be any other way. Granted, we don't want them to suffer, but, would I want to get rid of the genes?
Right.
No.
We would not have an iPhone if
right.
Steve Jobs wasn't absolutely out of his mind.
Exactly. Completely kind of OCD.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We can only deal with what's in front of us, so to speak. So that's interesting. But I want to go back just before we finish. I mentioned to you that I look at my kids and I worry about their bellies if they have, God forbid, signs that would point towards inflammatory bowel disease, which I have and we've covered. And you talked about your kids. One of the questions that I failed to ask earlier was, do you ever look at yourself and worry that you're potentially headed in the same direction? I mean, you're doing a lot of work and you're healthy and you're active, but that can't stave off the freight train of mental illness if it's coming your way. Do you have moments where you're like, shit, or do you feel in control?
No, it's a really good question. And, back to like when I was 14 and I was spiraling downward, had I not kind of been saved then, I'm sure I could have been a drug addict. I'm sure I could have,
What saved you when you were 14?
Well, it was probably Susie sending me to Switzerland and me seeing my value, seeing that like I'm more than just like a pretty girl at 14. Like I have a brain. Yeah. There's more out there for me than my concrete surroundings that I was put back into. I also think for me, because I had gone to therapy only once, which is surprising, and I am all for therapy. But
as a kid,
I was like a young adult, and that kind of opened up my mind and made me realize I don't want to be codependent, because I was codependent on an old boyfriend, and my mom was codependent on her boyfriend. And I realized like I'm following the same footsteps. I am going to change my course. So therapy at that moment when I needed it totally saved me. Same with writing. Had I not found my grandpa's manuscript and started writing, those few years of writing were really hard. I developed TMJ. I wasn't sleeping. I was having horrible nightmares. I was basically kicking up dirt, uncovering
family dirt,
unearthing all these family ghosts.
So personal, my gosh.
And, it was my own form of therapy, day in, day out, day in, day out, day in, day out. Nighttime, morning time, like constantly.
With really no avenue to offload all of these thoughts. I can understand you must have been feeling nuts.
Had I not had these really kind of like gone back and thought about the course, and I would not have found compassion for my mom. I would not have found understanding from where she got to in her life. And I truly believe that whether you go to therapy or you write or you talk or whatever you need to get to that point of like kind of like a self-awareness, it's so important, because if you keep pushing it down, it's going to come out somehow negatively. So
it was interesting. Andy Berman, his interview, which is also fantastic, he said he has on occasion taken phone calls from people who are dealing with the same sort of mental illnesses that he's struggling with, and he's gone and picked them up and actually really, I mean, it's kind of amazing. He's taken care of them and brought them to his doctor. And I don't think you can do that. I think, as I hate to say this, but as a woman, you've got to protect yourself and look out for people who, like, if you told me, Ben, I'm on my way to PCH to pick up this guy who's struggling, I would be like, hold on, let's get Todd on board. Yeah. So obviously you can't do that. And we've hit on most of this, but the question I want to ask you is, how would you help somebody who came to you and said, I'm struggling with mental illness, I don't feel grounded, I'm scared, help?
I want to start by saying I am not a therapist, and I don't pretend to be a therapist. This is just from love and from personal experience and from wanting to help. What I would start with is just sitting with them, right? So they know they're not alone. Sure. I mean, often that is the best thing you can do. One of the things that I learned when becoming a lead presenter for NAMI's Ending the Silence program is that a lot of people are too afraid to even ask for help. And so even if you reach out to somebody and, your gut or your intuition is telling you that they're not doing well, and you say, how are you? And they're like, fine. Well, keep trying. Say, you know what? I'm going to come over. Or do you want to go grab a cup of tea?
Sure.
Or how about I just stop by and bring you
some
cookies?
Stay in
stay
there.
Present, stay there. So they
view.
know that they're not alone. Remind them that there is help and that there is hope, whether it's therapy, whether it's like a group program. And by the way, NAMI is a great resource and often
also
free resource.
After you answer, I do want to ask for some resources that we can put out there for people who will need help.
Right. Well, I mean, I would start with NAMI because they're just phenomenal.
Okay.
And they have...
And where do you find NAMI?
It's NAMI.org. And then, of course, if it gets to the point where somebody's feeling suicidal, I would call the suicide hotline. But the question being, what would I do? I would just offer hope and be there and look into those resources and call those resources.
So we spent a lot of time talking about your mom, and obviously there's a direct link between your mom's illness and the reason why you've started this whole new path. And I'm wondering how your dad factors in to all of this and what you might say about him that could help inform your listeners more about who you are and what sort of led you to this point, and how do you feel talking about him?
So yes, it's true. I do talk a lot about my mom and write about my mom. So thanks for the question about my dad. So my dad has always been kind of that stable force in my life, in the background, somebody that I could reach out and ask a question to. But when I was younger, he was not the most present father, especially once my parents got divorced. Was he working? Yeah, he was working. He was a criminal defense attorney, and he, was working to, build a name for himself. And he ended up and make $1 exactly with young kids at home, which was part of the reason why I think my mom kind of rebelled, because she was bored at home and wanted to she was a pretty young mom and also had those moments of mania and wanted to get out and party. But my dad, I think he didn't have that role model of what it was like to be a present father. And I think he really changed a lot with my brothers. I have 2 half brothers. So my dad remarried when I was about 13. His second chance with his second family, he was very present. He took them, on camping trips and just spent a lot more time with them. Whereas Adam and I, we weren't as close to him as my brothers were to him. And I think it's because, he had this new, young, beautiful, blonde wife come in. And my dad had a little bit of a midlife crisis around the time that they got divorced. And my dad got a Porsche, and my dad bought Lakers.
The time who got divorced?
My dad and my mom got divorced. And,
because I know your dad's single again.
My dad's single again. My dad is on his 3rd divorce. Handsome guy who everyone wants to set him up, and I think he's done. I think he's happy in his bachelor home with his fish tank. And I have to say, whereas when I was 13 and I was also a teenager and didn't love having to schlep my stuff back and forth to his house, I kind of felt like I wanted to be with my friends and then subsequently my boyfriends. So I take some ownership, but, I think he didn't know how to deal with my manic mom and kind of just let us figure it out. As I said, he was really close with my brothers. And subsequently, as time has passed, we've become very close. I do really admire my dad on a lot of levels. But one is...
He's such a sweet guy.
Is his forgiveness. I mean, he forgave my mom.
Yeah.
And he's very close still with my mom and Sonia, who's my stepmom. And now when we have family get-togethers, we're all together. And,
does that feel weird at all,
no,
or
it's
forced?
It's fantastic. And it's how it should be. And I wrote an essay called Divorced Parents Don't Have to Suck. And I think my dad's a great model for that because he never spoke poorly about my mom when he could have. I'm grateful for him. Do I wish that he had been more present in our lives when we were younger? Yes. Were there times that, I wish that he wasn't so frugal with us and a little more generous? Yes, but he's learned how to, he's changed.
Yeah, he's figured it out.
He's figured it out. And I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful that my girls get to know their grandpa.
Does his relationship with your mom ever make you wonder what it would have been like had they stayed together? And do you ever think about that?
Oh, yeah. So now sometimes when my mom comes into town, we'll go out. It'll be my mom and my dad and my girls, and they look so cute together. And I've had those thoughts, like, had my mom not had, those manic episodes where she felt the need to philander when she was lonely because he was working and everything, so much would have been different. Likely Adam would not have spiraled out of control potentially and become a drug addict. Maybe
he would have gotten the help he needed.
Right. Or it just wouldn't have happened. So I think about all that. But, again, I don't regret anything. I hope my parents don't regret anything. I have 2 incredible half brothers that I'm so close to that I adore. And Sonia.
They are awesome.
They're so awesome.
Adam and Benjamin, right? No, not Adam.
Benjamin and Daniel.
Benjamin and Daniel, yes.
And Benjamin's about to expect a new baby. So I'm so excited to have a new niece or nephew.
I remember taking him to a Pearl Jam concert when he was 14.
Yeah. So, and they're great men. And here's the thing about family. If you can just get past any kind of hurdles and hurt and forgive and move forward, family gatherings can be so fabulous, which is what it is now. It's like a love fest, and I'm so grateful.
You're lucky.
Very
You're really
lucky.
My parents tried to pull that off, and I don't think they quite achieved what they were aiming for. It was a valiant effort, but I think your parents, having had the time to really kind of live their lives. I mean, there was like a long time between your parents' breakup and the time that you guys all started like spending every holiday together. And obviously it took the divorce of your dad and Sonia to sort of materialize. And now you have this, it's the strangest life, isn't it?
Yeah, it's untraditional, and yet it's like brilliant and it works. And as many misgivings I've had for my parents as I think all people have with their parents, what I respect the most is in the end, they put family first.
That's fantastic. And if it takes a couple decades to figure that out, at least they have the benefit of children who still absolutely love them and support them. I see you with your dad. He comes to your parties. I know how much you love both of your parents, and I think they're very fortunate to have your support. And I know Adam's support, and it's been a rocky road over the early years, but now it's really neat to see. And I love to see Norman.
But what I will say, Ben, is that, of course, it has not always been that way. And Todd and I laugh because we often think that we kind of have been the calm in the storm around us with all the divorces.
Of course.
And yet we found one another, and we built this foundation that everybody has been able to come back to. And in a way, I'm younger, but I feel somewhat like the matriarch because I'm the one doing the family holidays. And I am so grateful for that role. And I don't take that for granted. And it's possible for anyone as long as you're willing to look at the good and kind of not forget the hurt, but forgive and move forward and open your heart. And then you too can have this home full of love. And I'll have all of these things in the show notes.
Wonderful. So if you could write yourself a love letter or any kind of letter that would prepare you for what's to come, and I'm talking maybe 20 years old, let's say, that could serve you well, what comes to mind?
So funny to be asked the question that I ask other people. When I was 20, I was in college, and, you have these big ambitions and you're trying to kind of separate yourself from your family, right? Because at that age, you want to be nothing like your mom or your dad.
Isn't that the truth?
Right? But what I would say is be patient. This is something I still need to work on. Just kind of have faith that the failures, the bumps in the road are going to lead you to where you need to be. But life really is a journey. It's not a destination. Stop rushing to get somewhere and enjoy the moment. Look around and be in the moment, right? Be present so that when you're sitting across from a friend, don't think about your next thing that you have to get to. Connect. I think a big thing I would have told myself is find compassion for your mom. Growing up, I was embarrassed of my mom a lot. I wanted to be nothing like her. I wanted to separate myself as far as possible from her in many ways. And I think it was my own protection to just say, oh, she's just eccentric. She's acting that way or being inappropriate because, and I didn't want to look at the fact that she had mental health issues, because if she had mental health issues, then maybe I had mental health issues. But my point being is that now, at the age I'm at, I love my mom for who she is. So I wish I could have had more compassion and understanding that she was struggling and that she was individual and that what she was doing was not a reflection on me. And
no, it wasn't your fault.
It wasn't my fault.
Not really her fault
and it wasn't,
either.
in many ways, wasn't really her fault.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Because I think if we can look at our parents, and that's one of the things that's been really incredible to write, is that you look at your parents as like 3D characters.
Sure.
They're not flat. They're not just, this is who you are. You're just a wild mom that says inappropriate things and embarrasses her daughter. Well, you're a human being with loves and thoughts and fears and a past. And so I think just finding compassion for others helps you then find compassion for yourself. But really, I would say to just continue to be patient and hopeful and loving.
That was beautiful. So this question will probably sound familiar to you. Is there anything that you do on a regular or semi-regular basis to ground yourself, to keep yourself happy, to disconnect and have Rachel time?
I would say physical activity is definitely my grounding point, whether it's doing yoga, and that could be even at my house for like 10 minutes, just doing a few sun salutations, or maybe even putting in my earbuds and going on a walk with the dog, or taking a Pilates class. It's just physical exercise. I feel so much better, right? Yeah. I mean, it's amazing how
it's a physiological
sweat
thing.
Or just,
But it's physiological.
It's physiological.
I mean, it really, the endorphins.
I don't do it every day, but I mean, I try to exercise as much as I can, hiking, and that can be like a group hike or whatever. I would say I love to cook. Don't love to clean, but I love to cook. That is, for me, I find pleasure in that. And that grounds me, being able to feed others, feed my family. It's like, I don't know. It just gives me a lot of pleasure and happiness.
You're one of my favorite cooks. I'll just go on
I'm
the
just
record.
a home cook. I'm a home cook. I'm not a chef, but I love to just, go to the farmer's market or see what's fresh and cook with a lot of fresh ingredients. I love making salads and all of that. And then I would say I try to meditate. Do I do it consistently? No, I need to get better. But I will say when I'm having like moments of feeling anxious or stressed or whatever it is, it's truly phenomenal how just quieting your mind for even 10 minutes just changes everything. It is remarkable.
It's the reset button.
Yeah. So I would say those things. And then, of course, being with my family and friends. And I have to say, doing this podcast has really given me a lot of happiness and helped me find purpose. And it's partly because I'm getting to connect with such wonderful people. And then they're finding value in it. And it's been a great journey that I never expected to be on.
Okay, so last question here. Where can we find you?
Well, if you're on this podcast, likely you'll see show notes with links to take you to my website, which has my Medium blog link. But it's basically rightnowrachel.com. That's right with a W. And the direct podcast link is just with a / rightnowrachel.com.
And we can find the podcast.
And you can find the podcast on everything, including Stitcher, Spotify, of course, Apple Podcasts, and all of, TuneIn, even YouTube.
Oh, YouTube.
I'm going to eventually be doing actual videos, but you can listen to the audio on YouTube.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Rachel, I want to thank you for letting me be a part of this from day one and for giving me the mic, so to speak, for today. And I love you, and I love being your friend and helping you and being invited to participate in something that is so near and dear to you has brought me great joy. So I just want to say thank you. And this was a real pleasure for me.
Oh, Ben, thank you so much. I cannot tell you how much your support has meant to me from the beginning. You've been my sounding board. And in fact, I just talked to my mom before you came over, and I told her you were interviewing me. And we were both gushing about what a special person you are.
Oh,
and so when Todd listens to this, he's going to have nothing to fear. We didn't even make fun of him.
No, and I feel bummed
I feel like
about
maybe
that.
we need to do something.
Yeah, well, we'll do another one just dedicated on trashing Todd.
Okay, sounds good.
He actually is a really good guy, and I'm thankful you married him because now I get to call you my friend and sort of sister.
It's so true. It's so true. Well, thanks for interviewing me.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for all the work you're doing for the people that I know need help and are benefiting from your efforts.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you, Rach.
This is Rachel Steinman. For more information or to contact me with any questions, comments, or guest ideas, please check out rightnowrachel.com. That's right with a W. Thank you so much for listening, subscribing, and sharing, dear family. And if you found value in what you've just heard, I would love and so appreciate a great review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Until next time, I wish you love, happiness, and good mental health.